Hello Year 12 single mathematicians, just going to continue with the Year 2 pure book, Chapter 1 to do with algebra. We're on 1.2 still, just the second half of 1.2, so I'm going to call it 1.2.5 algebraic fractions. Today's focus is on being able to add and subtract algebraic fractions. Last time we did multiply and divide, adding and subtracting algebraic fractions is a little bit different. Actually a lot different. Now, easy number 1 is simplifying a over 2x plus b over 3x. And the main difference with adding or subtracting fractions is the denominator, or effectively the size of the slice or whatever, however you conceptually think of fractions, needs to be exactly the same. We call this finding a common denominator. So preferably the lowest common denominator as well. So the lowest common denominator between a 2x and a 3x isn't just multiplying the denominators, which finds a common denominator, but the lowest one, you have to think about it. And in this case, it would be 6x. So if you attempted to write them over the lowest common denominator, if you don't write them over the lowest common denominator, then you'll probably have to simplify even more at the end. So at some point you'll have to simplify, but you're guaranteed to have done it if you don't pick the lowest common denominator. So the problem is you have to think about what you've got to change the numerator to. Because the 2x has been times by 3 to get 6x, you've got to times the numerator by 3 as well, otherwise the fraction changes. And similarly, you've got to times the numerator in this case by 2, because you've times the 3x by 2 to get 6x. And you are performing an addition. When you add two fractions with the same denominator, the denominator does not change, and the numerator, the shortest way to write that would be 3a plus 2b, and that would be your final answer. That does not simplify any further. For those of you thinking there's a common 3 and a 3, the 3 would have to be common to the b as well. That is as simple as it goes. Now part B, slightly more complicated, but we have a pair of fractions again with different denominators. Now when you've got a more complicated denominator like this, you're always advised to visualize them as fractions. And again, we're picking the lowest common denominator. So for this, the lowest common denominator would actually be the product of these two. X plus 3, x plus 1, x plus 3, x plus 1. Wherever you do, never expand the denominator. Okay? If you can avoid expanding brackets as much as possible, that would be great, and definitely never expand the denominator. I've got to times the top, the first numerator by an x plus 1. I'm going to times the second numerator by an x plus 3. And we are performing a subtraction. Now you do have to write this as a single fraction. And when doing so, you do expand the brackets on the numerator and collect like terms. But again, you never expand the denominator. So expand the numerators and collect like terms. You've got a 2x plus 2. Don't make a mistake with the subtraction of the negative sign. You're subtracting 1x and you are subtracting 3. And the shortest way to write all of that is x minus 1 over x plus 3 x plus 1. And again, I'll say it for a third or fourth time, never expand the denominator. The reason you don't expand the denominator is when you get this far, you might have to simplify further, and it's impossible to simplify further if you've expanded the denominator. Because if that was an x plus 1 instead of an x minus 1, then there would be a cancellation at the bottom. But in this case, that's as far as it goes. But yeah, there is a chance that you would have to simplify at the end. The third and final part of this question is this. And again, at first glance, this looks similar to the one above. You've got two weird denominators. Could write them as the same common denominator and go from there. But it's quite difficult to find the lowest common denominator for this. And it's borrowing a tip from multiplying and dividing algebraic fractions, which is you should get into the habit of factorizing everything first. So the first thing you would do is kind of write everything as brackets. And when you do that, the second denominator goes to an x plus 1, x minus 1. It's one of those patterns you need to spot difference between two squares. And now, when you think about the lowest common denominator, it's actually x plus 1, x minus 1 is the lowest common denominator. And that makes this question a lot easier. So you've got to times the first numerator by x minus 1. But the second numerator doesn't change, because the fraction denominator never changed. And again, you never expand the denominator, but you do have to expand and collect like terms for the numerator. And the shortest way to write that is 3x subtract 7 over, don't expand the denominator, x plus 1, x minus 1. So the pattern for this like A-level approach to simplifying fractions is it's more about factorizing than expanding. So the first thought in your mind should always be factorizing, and then if there's nothing else left to do, you expand brackets. But you'll see in the mark scheme and everything, every time they show a final answer, very rarely do they expand the denominator. So try to avoid that potential mistake. So questions I would like you to attempt are on page 8. It's called exercise 1C. And okay, let's go for question 2 and question 3. And we'll go with the first column, first row of each. Then we'll go question 4, and then we'll go question 6. So 2, 3, first row, and then question 4 and question 6, and that's it.